How do the Caps proceed with the rest of the season? Next on Locked On Caps.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Caps, we talk about how should the Capitals proceed with the rest of the season now that they're out of it, so to speak. Should they call some players up from Hershey to get a better look at them? Then we'll talk about the latest with John Carlson and Darcy Kuemper. And ultimately, what is Peter Laviolette's future in Washington? But just to get it going here, we're happy to have Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington back on the show. Matt, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on, Dan. Thanks.
So just taking a look at this season, it's not, and I've spoke with you for quite some time, throughout this entire season, the ups, the downs, the ins, the outs. And it seems like for me right now that the Caps are out of it. You take a look at Money Puck, there's just a 0 point whatever percent chance of them making it to the playoffs. And then the Capitals blow games that on paper they should have won. They lose to St. Louis, Minnesota, and then they lose to Columbus in Washington. Where does this Caps for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think Hockey Reference is a little bit more optimistic, giving them a 2.9% chance. But, when you're talking about numbers that low, it certainly means they're pretty much on the outside looking in, barring some miracle run here and a lot of help from the teams in front of them in the standings. The Capitals are probably going to have their season here end in the next couple of weeks. They've got 10 games left down the stretch against some pretty good competition, too. So they're going to have to really put together some kind of historic run if they're going to make things interesting. But as I said, more likely than not, they're going to be finishing up their season here. And, it's a disappointing run. I think that this is a team, that has made the playoffs 14 in the last 15 years. They have the expectation of being there every single season. And, as we've learned in the Ovechkin era, that's to be expected. So when it doesn't happen, it's certainly, a blow, not just for the fans, but for the players and the coaches as well. So as they kind of finish out here, they're going to try to finish strong. They're still looking for wins every single time they take the ice. But, when you're blowing games, you take a 3-0 lead against a team like Columbus and you're not able to hold on to it. It's definitely not a good sign for what's to come in your season.
And that's what I was hearing in the post-game presser is defense. The Caps need defense. There is no way that game should have got that far out of hand. A 3-0 lead. And I know kind of the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, Charlie Lindgren blew it. But I ultimately don't think that's the case. I'm sure there's probably some of the goals that he would like to have had back. But you got to think to a certain extent the defense and even, the forwards and stuff were kind of folding and not really doing any favors to Chucky.
Yeah, I think, they've had problems like that all season. And really, we've heard Peter Laviolette talk recently just about systematic breakdowns, and you're at a point in the season where you can't really afford to be having those kinds of mistakes. If a player, makes a bad play on a puck and it creates a breakaway, sure, you can live with that. But when guys just aren't where they're supposed to be and the system breaks down, that's a sign of a larger problem. And that's what the Capitals are facing. And, they did trade away some key players and they brought in some new faces. So, you'd expect there to not really be, chemistry right away in a lot of those areas and a complete grasp of the system. But, with so much little time left, the Capitals can't really afford to be making those mistakes. And that's kind of where they are at this point.
So the big question for me, I guess, is how do the Capitals proceed? For me, I think that I would try to give some guys in Hershey a call up if the Caps are in fact out of it, or maybe they don't perceive they're out of it. But whenever they are mathematically out of it, I think it would be advantageous for the Capitals to give, maybe McMichael or, some of these other guys that are kind of vying for spots on the Bears. I know it's not ultimately a best case scenario for Hershey because they're actually playing rather well this year. But is that your assessment? Do you think they should give some of these guys a better look once the Capitals are ultimately out of it?
I certainly don't think it can hurt. I think that, when you get to a point where you pretty much are not in the playoff hunt, you start to look ahead to next season. Certainly the front office, made moves at the deadline with that in mind. But at the same time, Peter Laviolette is in the last year of his contract. He's still fighting for wins. He's not assured to be part of this organization past this season. He's focused on what he came in here to do, and that's to win hockey games. So while that hasn't been happening a whole lot lately, he's been making roster and lineup decisions based on who is the best set of players that he can have the ice on a given night. So, as we kind of wind down here and maybe it takes them officially being eliminated for it to happen, maybe we see, one or two of those guys you mentioned get the call up and get a look at the NHL level. And certainly with John Carlson potentially nearing a return here and the salary cap implications of bringing him back, you have to wonder, what other kind of corresponding moves might be involved there. They might need a cheaper player around as opposed to a more expensive one. So it's going to be interesting to see what GM Brian McClellan decides to do.
Now, being that you bring up Peter Laviolette, I'm one of the rare people, I talked to quite a few people on the show, and everyone is like, this is Laviolette's last season, get him out of here. He is the winningest U.S.-born coach. These guys don't just grow on trees out there. I ultimately, at the end of the day, don't think it was Peter Laviolette's fault. I think that he was dealt a really bad hand. I think that he had the pieces in place at the beginning of the season, and then his team faced a myriad of injuries. What are your thoughts on Peter Laviolette? For me, I think they should give him another shot, or if they do plan on replacing him, the one thing I hate is kind of a knee-jerk reaction. We fired him. Who did you replace him with? Oh, we got some candidates. We'll get back to you on that one. That's the position I don't think the Capitals should be in.
Yeah, I think if you do decide to move on from Peter Laviolette, you should have in mind, 1, 2, or 3 candidates who you really feel confident would give you a better chance to win right now. The fact of the matter is, this is not a Capitals team that is about to go into a rebuild. You're not going to bring somebody in, who's getting their first shot at being a head coach to coach a 37-year-old Ovechkin and company. You want somebody who's experienced, somebody who can help him continue to play winning hockey here over the last couple of years of his career as he chases Wayne Gretzky's record. So, how many coaches out there really have the pedigree and experience to do that better than Peter Laviolette? I think that's something that the Capitals really have to figure out between themselves. And certainly, there are names out there that could fit that bill. But, at the end of the day, Laviolette has been in this organization for 2 years now. A lot of the players know his system. And if you think you can make it work, why not try to see if you can run it back with him and continue to play winning hockey over these last few years with Ovechkin.
Yeah, because it only makes sense to me to either have someone in mind or just go all in on Peter. I mean, like I say, guys like him, they don't grow on trees, and there's no real candidate that kind of jumps out at me that could be, the next replacement. I've often heard some people say, well, maybe the head coach down at Hershey might be a viable option, but, ultimately we don't know at the end of the day if that's the case or not. All right, so after the break here, we will talk about the latest with the injury to John Carlson and Darcy Kuemper, and when can we expect to see them return? We'll talk about that after the break. No matter how great the last game was, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you're hiring, you need Indeed because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applicants that meet your have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites, hopping from site to site, hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed partners you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match assessments and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job descriptions, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements. So start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked-on. Offer valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/locked-on to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Indeed, you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this episode, we have Matt Weyrich on the show, and let's talk about one of the biggest pieces missing from this lineup that could have ultimately changed how this team has played as of late, and that is John Carlson. As we know about John Carlson, he sustained a major injury less than a minute into the third period of a 4-1 win over the visiting Winnipeg Jets on December 3rd. Carlson was struck by a 90-mile-per-hour slap shot off the stick of Jets defenseman Brendan Dillon, Carlson's former teammate in Washington. There was no time for Carlson to duck or dodge the puck. The impact left him with a small skull fracture above the right ear and severed temporal artery. Wow, that's a lot worse. And I guess a lot of people thought, I heard all kinds of crazy things following that, his ear was severed off, and his wife kind of debunked that. What is the latest that you've heard about John Carlson, and when do you expect to see him back in the lineup?
Yeah, certainly a scary injury, and one that, makes you kind of stop and think about, the true risks that some of these guys take, when they do go out on the rink. We talked a lot about earlier this year with Nicholas Backstrom about how his hip injury was one that was really affecting him in his day-to-day life. And certainly, this is something that affected Carlson's entire livelihood, and could have been life-threatening had the Caps medical staff not taken quicker action. So, certainly, to have that injury happen on December 23rd, and then to be celebrating Christmas with your family 2 days later, I mean, it had to be a surreal 72 hours for Carlson. But it's been about 3 months now, almost to the day, since that injury occurred. And he's been making a lot of progress toward coming back to the point where I think we could be seeing him very soon. He's been taking normal part in Capitals line rushes and practices, morning skates in a contact jersey. Tom Wilson, notably, has been trying to kind of get in close with him and give him a little taste of real fast-paced hockey action. So that's been funny to watch. But I think we could see Carlson, make a return here, any day now. Really, it just kind of depends on when he really feels back to 100% and where he feels like he isn't putting his body at severe risk returning. So the Capitals would certainly love to get him back. Obviously, the state of the season is not one that really lends itself to making a run here, but at the same time, when Carlson was out, when he left December 23rd, that was kind of the peak of the Capitals season. They were in the middle of a 11-2-2 month, their best of the season. Alex Ovechkin was passing Gordie Howe in that same game for second all-time in the all-time scoring list. That was kind of the pinnacle of the season. And with Carlson out, things have kind of fallen to the wayside. So I think that just proves what a valuable player he still is, even as he gets into his mid to late 30s. John Carlson is still just as important to this team as he ever has been. And certainly they're looking forward to having him back at full strength next year.
And one of the players that was brought in on the trade deadline was Rasmus Sandin, and that was a big addition to this team. Kind of a good two-way defenseman, has a good defense, good offense to him. Kind of an exciting thought to think of John Carlson and Rasmus Sandin playing at the same time. There was a lot of uncertainty on who was going to play on the Caps blue line. Then we saw TVR get a new deal. We saw Jensen get a new deal. So there are some more answers, but kind of some questions that come into focus a little bit is, did Brian McClellan do the right thing to bring back a lot of those guys as well? If you're just talking about the blue line here for a minute, if what on the ice isn't working, or do you think there was a better option out there ultimately?
I think they've been very happy with what Trevor Van Riemsdyk and Nick Jensen have brought to the table this year. TVR being one of the team's best penalty killers. You look at his plus minus throughout the year on the PK, it's among the best in the league. Expected goal percentage, all of that. It really lends itself to supporting the case to bring TVR back. And certainly that brought both him and Nick Jensen back on affordable deals. And I think that's a big factor to look at as well with the state of the Capitals salary cap situation and the fact that it's the salary cap is not expected to rise by more than 1 million next season. So the Caps are going to continue to be kind of right up against that number. And they obviously had some holes that they plugged so far, but they still have a few more additions to make this offseason, some moves to fill in a few spots, even on the blue line. Depending on what they do with Martin Feravari and Alex Alexiev, that'll certainly come into play as well as to what they decide to do this offseason. So, I think from a standpoint of what makes sense and where the biggest holes they needed to fill, Nick Jensen and Trevor Van Riemsdyk were two guys that I thought have provided very solid contributions this year. Both have been very durable. Jensen obviously missing some time lately, but up until that had really been in the lineup pretty much all season. TVR only missed his first game last night just because his wife was expecting a child. So, other than that, he's been out there every single night. You bring in Sandin, he's been looking really good offensively, had some trouble on the defensive end for sure, causing a few breakaways there that I'm sure, he wants to get cleaned up. But I think that's something where, he's still very young. And as you give him more and more responsibility and get him more integrated in the system, I think he has really exciting potential with this team. So I'm really interested to see how Peter Laviolette decides to run out those D pairs. He hasn't commented publicly on whether or not Sandin and Carlson are going to skate together. We've seen Sandin go with TBR. We've seen him with Jensen as of last night. So maybe they try him with Carlson here down the stretch to see how that looks. Maybe they go back to Faravari Carlson, which was a very good pairing last season. So very interested to see what Laviolette decides to do. And I think that this blue line overall, it's been a solid group. The PK has been among the best in the league this year, a top 10 unit for sure. And I think they've been pretty pleased overall. I think it's pretty telling that they've shook up the forward lines a lot more than they've shaken up the D pairs this year.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of the things to look at. There's still some lingering injuries, I think. I was at the game in Minnesota, and it just seems like Nick Backstrom isn't 100%. I know that you're at a lot of the games in person there. You watch them on TV. What are your thoughts on it? There was a couple instances in the game against Minnesota where it seems like a bad pass or kind of a coughed up puck, something that he's not traditionally about. Have you heard anything about Backstrom not being 100%, or is he good to go?
I haven't heard anything about him not being at 100%, but I do know that they've really been kind of shaking things up with him. The guys that he's been skating with, it really hasn't been the same on a consistent basis. Some of that due to injury, some of that due to just trying things out and seeing, who he kind of gels with. I mean, they've been pretty successful with Ovechkin and Strome on that top line. And, Kuznetsov has been there as well. And not just this year, but in years past, they've had a lot of success with that. Him and Wilson pair well together, and they've liked Wilson opposite Ovechkin, so that's kind of been a natural trio there. But Backstrom has kind of been on a separate line, a line of his own, and they really have just kind of been mix and matching, trying to figure out what exactly is going to work. And I think it's a situation where when you do get thrown into the middle of a season, like Mick Backstrom and Tom Wilson did, not having a training camp, not having your normal off season, it's a little bit tough to catch up. I mean, Tom Wilson was just talking about it the other day, how it took him a few games to really get back to, he felt healthily 100%, but, you have to adjust to game speed, and you have to, really get your legs out underneath you out there. And for Backstrom, a guy who's a little bit older, went through a bit more dramatic of a surgery than Tom Wilson. I think it's expected that, this year was probably not where we were going to see Nick Backstrom at his best. And if we are going to see him truly return to form, it probably comes next year.
So just to kind of finish up on this segment here, what is the latest that you're hearing about Darcy Kuemper? It's kind of, historically, he's a bit injury prone, whether it's his fault or not. I would say the injuries that he faced this year weren't his fault per se. When do you expect to see Darcy Kuemper back?
Yeah, Kuemper has skated on the last couple of practices. He was out there morning skate yesterday, and was actually the first goaltender off the ice. Kind of made me think that he was going to start, but Charlie Lindgren was right behind, and it turned out that Lindgren was going to be the guy. Kuemper mentioned that he's getting close. He's playing a full practice at this point. He's had logged two straight full practices without any issue. I think he's just kind of slow playing a little bit until he feels fully 100%, like he's not risking anything. So I would imagine that he's very much in consideration to start tomorrow against Chicago. We'll see if they decide to go with Lindgren one more time, but I would imagine that, it's no more than a game or two at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that is another game that I kind of penciled in as a must-win game, but then again, so is Columbus. So we're really hoping for bigger and better things for the Caps here. All right, so after the break here, Washington Capitals' Alex Ovechkin passed Wayne Gretzky for the most 40-goal seasons in an NHL career. Yeah, there is a bit of a silver lining to this season after all, isn't there? We'll talk about it after the break. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, America's #1 sportsbooks, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. And guys, even if you're not into betting, you could bet on an upcoming Wizards game. It makes watching the games that much more exciting. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger game payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this edition, we have Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington, and just a really great evening for Alex Ovechkin. Just really rolled out the red carpet for Ovi and his family, his wife, his kids, his brother. They were all there. Just a really great night. It gave you all the warm fuzzies, if you will, being a Caps fan. Talk to me a little bit about Alex Ovechkin's season and what that means as he continues to knock out one milestone after the other.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that we've learned this season, it's that Alex Ovechkin has still got it. Setting a new NHL record, passing Wayne Gretzky for the most 40-goal seasons ever. He's just the second oldest player, tied for the second oldest player with a 40-goal season. He has 90 goals since the start of last year, which ranks fourth in the league over that span, with the only guys in front of him being Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Austin Matthews. So, that is pretty good company, and not to mention that all three of those guys at least 10 years younger than him. Ovechkin's kind of in a class of his own at this point as far as the elite goal scorers go. There's just nobody else like him, scoring from the same spot, and you still can't stop it. I mean, I think his game has very much lended itself to being able to continue deep into his 30s, but, props to him for keeping himself in shape and being able to do that. I mean, he still plays a very physical brand of hockey as well. His durability has been exceptional, really only missing, I think it's like 55 games. I mean, in his entire career, that's just an unheard of statistic, really. We talk about Sidney Crosby and all the time that he's missed over the years, and, what his numbers might look like had he not missed any time. We don't have to guess with Alex Ovechkin. He is rivaling the great one now. Coming up, where it's probably not going to happen next season, but the year after. But it's coming, and I think everybody recognizes it at this point. It's kind of inevitable. Ovechkin's just going to keep doing his thing, and the Capitals, like you said, really rolled out the red carpet for him. It was a cool night with all the ceremonies. I think a lot of feel good moments with his family there, and Ted Leonsis and Joe Beninati. I mean, it was the whole 9 yards, and lots of really cool gifts. I thought that the stick by the USSR national team was really cool. Just considering Ovechkin's massive stick collection. If you haven't heard about it, you should definitely check it out. It's awesome. And that will be one of the coolest probably additions to his collection there. So, would have been nice if they had won the game. But certainly, all the moments were there. He course scores the first goal of the game 5 minutes in. Wasn't originally credited to him. They gave it to Strome, but had to make a correction. But definitely looked like it was his goal, and he just keeps on climbing these record books, and it's just been really cool to watch.
And just taking a look at him, like you were mentioning, a couple of the players there, he is an elite company, and most of the players on this list are much younger. Connor McDavid, David Pastrnak, Mikko Rantanen, Leon Draisaitl, Braden Point, Tage Thompson, Jason Robertson, and Ovi keeps knocking it out one after the other. The big thing for me is if he can stay healthy, and he is a huge dude, and that doesn't really always show on TV. I was down at Kettler or a MedStar Ice Complex years ago, and he came out of the training facility there, and that is a huge, huge dude. And I mean, even without pads on the guy, you wouldn't want to mess around with him. Do you ultimately see him doing it in the 24-25 season? I see different things on Google. There's these trackers, and they got him kind of just according to analytics. Do you think he'll ultimately be able to hit that in the 24-25 season?
Yeah, I mean, being only 70 goals away at this point, 35 almost seems like a foregone conclusion for each of these next 2 years. I mean, he's got 3 years left on his deal, so I think that certainly by the time he finishes that contract, the record will be his. He'll be the sole member of the 900 club, which is just crazy to think. And if he wanted to play, deep into his 40s, I'm sure he could break 1,000 and be the first to do that and really be in his own stratosphere. But certainly that's a decision that he hasn't made yet, and one he's going to have to weigh in a couple of seasons. But to answer your question, I do think that in 2 years from now is probably when we're going to see it. I think, as you mentioned, some of the websites out there, the math is around mid-December of the 2024-2025 season. So December 2024, mark your calendars and pre-order those tickets, because I'm sure those prices will go up as we continue to get closer.
So, I mean, I'm even just trying to think of anyone that could catch him. I mean, I would say Connor McDavid, or, it's if you had to pick one player that you think one day could catch him. I know there's Bedard and, all the craziness that surrounds him. Do you think that McDavid is even a possibility?
I mean, Connor McDavid is very clearly the best player in the world right now. What he has been doing this year has been absolutely incredible. Best season of his career so far, and that's really saying something. So I think if anyone could do it, it's probably him or Austin Matthews. It's just the longevity of it is really what it comes down to. I mean, you have to be averaging 30 to 40 goals a year for almost 20 years to challenge this record. And you never know what can happen with these guys with injuries and how they break down throughout their careers. So, it's tough. Like I said, he's 10 years, Ovechkin's 10 years older than all of these guys who are scoring at this pace right now. There's nobody who's like 32 who, could threaten if he continues. I mean, we're talking about guys having to do this for another decade. And, that's definitely not a foregone conclusion by any means. So, certainly players like Matthews and McDavid have the talent to do it, but it's really going to depend on whether or not they're able to continue this level of dominance for at least another 8 to 10 years.
And the good thing for me is I know at least it won't be Sidney Crosby catching him, so all the Penguins fans can just shut up about that. All right, Matt, once again, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work, or are you working on any big stories you want to let everyone know about?
Yeah, you can check out all my work over at NBCSportsWashington.com, and I'm on Twitter by Matt Weyrich as we go down the stretch here. These final 10 games, just going to be, looking at some players' individual performances throughout the year, to tease at a couple of guys like Alexi Protas and Dylan Strome, both, I think, enjoying strong seasons with the Capitals this year at their own stages of their own development and careers. So going to be diving into them a little bit and looking forward to putting those out. So definitely stay tuned.
All right, Matt, thanks for joining us. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Locked On Game to Game NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcast. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.